I started with kind of a boring route. I started with traditional classical piano lessons when I was pretty young. I was 4. My uncle was a session player here in Los Angeles, and just got me into wanting to play the piano at a young age. And that was sort of the beginning for me. And the short version is the piano lessons turned to guitar lessons, to buying a saxophone, getting to own a clarinet, getting a drum kit, and it just turned into, and then a computer, and that was it, off to the races.
I was similar, except for I refused to take piano lessons, and I didn't really want to do it. So my mom didn't push it too much. She actually taught piano, and she was an opera singer, and my dad mainly played guitar. And so I was around music. I took it for a little bit for granted when I was really young. And I didn't really fall in love with it until I saw E.T. That was right around the time where I fell with it. And that's kind of when I got inspired to be involved in it.
Yeah. So slightly before you guys began collaborating, around the time of 2005 or 2006, I believe that Taylor, you were working with Hans Zimmer around the time of Da Vinci Code. And then, Andy, you were working on a solo album. So how, around that time, did your two paths connect? And can you describe what it really was that made your guys' collaborative relationship really click?
We ran into each other, actually. We met through a mutual friend who we're still friends with today. And it was just kind of a strange thing. We both kind of nerded out on the same gear, the same type of music, the same albums. We just had similar tastes, and we started writing together more for fun than for projects. And this was actually even before that. This was maybe around 2002. We just started. I'd go over to Taylor's house. We'd hang out. Like, he had songs he had written. We'd play with them. We'd produce them. We'd track stuff. And that sort of just started. It kind of just turned into, we enjoyed working together, and then we had a few opportunities on just small independent films, and we decided to do one together and another together, and it just kind of spiraled from there.
So you guys have collaborated many, many times on countless films, whether it's Hush, Ouija, Origin of Evil, or the new Netflix series Haunting of Hill House. You've collaborated with the writer-director Mike Flanagan many, many times. So can you describe how you guys first met Mike, and how does your guys' collaborative relationship usually work? So does he bring you a script and show you a draft? Or does he bring you the rough cut? And how does the process normally go?
We met Mike on Oculus, and we knew the music supervisor who was doing the movie, and they were going through about 10 composers they selected to interview, and we were lucky enough to be one of them. And we spoke to Mike and Trevor Macy, the producer, and we just really liked them a lot. Kind of had the same taste in music and a lot of certain things, and just hit it off really well. And we loved Oculus, and we were excited about it. And they just called us and said, hey, we had no idea we had the gig. And then they said, oh, you guys had the movie. And then it was kind of a slow process from there. We finished Oculus, and every time you work on a movie, you obviously, with anyone that you enjoy and respect, you want to work with them again. And the thing about Mike Flanagan is that he kind of inspires you to be the best that you can be, and to keep improving and to keep being better. And I think he does that across all of the elements of filmmaking, from editing to writing. He's great with kids. I've seen him with kids on sets of movies. He's just really quite talented in all areas. So I think early, it depends on the movie and it depends on the project. For Oculus, we brought it in post-production. They had finished the film. It was totally done, But for movies like Hush, he would send us ideas and things he liked, and while he was filming still. And on Haunting in Hill House, it was a very similar thing. We had read the script, and we wrote probably, an hour, maybe a little more, worth of music while he was filming.
Mm. And was that music then temped into the rough cuts of the show when they sent it to you? The music that you guys wrote, all the suites?
I'll let Danny go ahead and take it from there.
Some of it was. There was a lot of it that was. I'd say about half of it was in certain versions, but what we found was we ended up kind of deconstructing everything a bit. It's funny because the main title is a good example. We were trying to remember how many versions of a main title we did, and I think, what did we decide, Taylor? We did 7 to 10 versions of the main title.
I think we did some versions early on that Mike never even heard, but yeah, I think it was 7 to 10, yeah.
Yeah, I think the first round of stuff we sent to him, we sent 7 to 10 versions, and it's funny, the very first one we did ended up being the main title, kind of a more sketched out version of it. But we kind of found that the show was so specific that even if they had temped some of our cues in, there were things in the spotting session or instances where Mike would say, the general vibe of this cue is working, but we need it to score the scene. And that kind of happened throughout the show, which was really fun because we got to basically deconstruct every theme over and over again on every episode, and it created a nice, when we were all done, Taylor and I looked back as we were putting the soundtrack together and thought oh wow, we've got so many cool different versions of each theme. So that was kind of a fun process to go through.
So looking at The Haunting of Hill House, the series is so incredibly unique because even though it can be looked at as a horror series, it's so much more than that. There's so many various layers, the complexity of the characters, the way that they interact, and you can tell that Mike had so much to say with this series, and it just comes through very, beautifully. So can you guys talk about beginning the series? How did you guys set yourself a path to sort of follow musically throughout your guys' time scoring this season? I hope it's this season and more seasons, but yeah.
Taylor, you want to go ahead?
Sure, path. Yeah, I think, I think we started off early with just some thematic material, thematic ideas, and finding the right tone of the sound of the show, I think, was really key. Mike also composes himself as well. And he's a very, an incredible piano player. So he was, we would write music, he would listen to it. He came up with an idea or wanted us to try something, we would go back and forth. It was very, very collaborative, which is, pretty rare to the degree that we were collaborative with him. And I think those early on, that helped set the tone of melody. There's about 4 to 5 themes or motifs in the score that really just kind of evolve and change a bit and repeat. And everything else after that is really more tonal sound. We recorded a water harp that we kind of made into a pad and some interesting, strange sounds to try to give the show a distinct, airy quality to it. And of course, the orchestration brought more of a classical and Gothic elements. And a lot of that stuff got worked on just kind of early on. We would send mock-ups and ideas, and then that would be, Mike would hear it and say, yes or no. And so that's kind of how it started.
So the main theme of the film, or at least not the film, the series, is this simple piano tune, but it's so incredibly sort of powerful. And I think the great thing about this score in specific is how subtle you guys can get without sacrificing the sort of emotional sort of push of it. And so there'll be very emotional scenes, and you guys will just have a solo piano over it. So can you guys talk about how you guys developed that sort of main piano motif that you guys, I don't know if you guys know which motif I'm sort of referencing, but...
It's interesting because the simplicity, that's pretty funny that you asked this, because we were kind of going back and forth with Mike while he was shooting, and we weren't quite getting the production. We had themes down, but we didn't quite have the production down of what was working. And so I actually flew out to Atlanta to sit with Mike one day and sat with him and Michael Fimignari, the DP, and kind of went over all of episode 1 and talked about sort of what Mike wanted. And he, I think something we were always trying to stay away from was having the music be melodramatic. We wanted the music to just kind of dance gently in the background as the story was being told, without pointing of a finger of like, you should be scared or you should be sad. We were trying to just support what was going on. And we sent around, after I flew to Atlanta, I came back, Taylor and I talked a lot about it. We deconstructed themes even more. And we sent about 5 or 6 tracks to Mike that we thought maybe we'd get fired on because they were so minimal and so sparse. And he loved them. He said, it's funny because, you know, I hit send on the email with the links, and I called Taylor and said, well, maybe this is it. And we got an email back from Mike like 40 minutes later, and he said, this is exactly, this is the show. Here we go. And from then on, it was just kind of off to the races. And then I think a lot of that comes through in like that epic episode 6.
Oh, of course.
For the first 3 quarters of the show.
And then the casket fall. Yeah, that's where you come in. Yep.
And the casket falls, and that's all the genius of Flanagan. He was very specific. He said, look, the casket falls, like one note. He's like, one note or one chord swell or do something very simple. And so we did. It's like literally one note and then like 38 seconds of silence. Almost ridiculous, but it's super effective.
It is super effective. And speaking of episode 6, I truly do think that's probably one of the best episodes in history of anything. Like literally, the way that episode is constructed, from the point of the cinematography and how it, you know, there's like 4 cuts I think during the whole episode, which is just mind-blowingly incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it was cool to get to go to Atlanta, and Mike walked me around the set and kind of showed me how he had the set built specifically for that episode, so that they could go from the present to the future and get between scenes. And it was just, it's incredible.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that makes this score in specific so interesting is the contrast between the very sort of intense moments and the very subtle, like we were talking about with the solo piano. And I noticed you guys use a lot of sort of piano and strings for many moments relating to the Cranes and sort of the family throughout the series. And then when we get to the more, intense sequences, perhaps taking place in the past or in the house, you introduce more unstable elements like, some big sort of drum hits and more aleatoric elements. So can you talk about how you guys developed this sort of sonic palette? Did it start with this sort of main theme that you guys have at the beginning of the show? And how did it sort of evolve throughout to the end of the series?
I think it was really two parts. The first part was in a lot of suites that we made for Mike early on. They had elements that he kind of picked out, and one of the elements was the drums that you're talking about, the hits. And so Andy came up with this drum hit and these drum hits, and Mike really liked them. He liked the feeling that they made, and we also tried hard not to keep them in time. We actually made an effort to make sure they were not a consistent beat hitting constantly, on the one. It would either drift or something. And Mike really liked the sound of them, and that kind of became used a lot in the house when things got a little gnarly. And I think the other element was specifically trying to come up with some sound that were very odd and different. And we came up with a bunch of cool stuff, again, like the waterphone things and these really odd, strange sounds and textures we made. And those different elements we kind of made a palette with, and we made cues with, and just to see how Mike would respond to them, to see if he'd be like, oh, what is that? Like, that's terrible. So I think it was a little bit of trial and error and seeing what he kind of gravitated towards and what he did not like, and that kind of thing. And that's what ended up defining the palette of the show, actually, was these sounds early on, and then of course the cues early on that we wrote.
So are you guys normally recording instruments while you're scoring the show, or does that normally come towards the end of it did you guys record orchestral elements for the show, or was it samples? Or yeah,
we did record orchestra for the show. We do like to track a lot of things as we go. It's funny, our studios are both, Taylor keeps his much cleaner than mine, but mine looks like an explosion. Just so that you have the ability to track things as you go, knowing like, oh, I'm not a violin player, but I know I want something to happen like this. And then, on the stage we get the talented, amazing musicians to do what they do. So it was kind of a combination, but yeah, the orchestra session was incredible because we were able to add a lot of depth and definition to a lot of the things that we had tracked.
So how do you guys normally collaborate in terms of, do you guys sort of give yourself specific cues, like on the cue sheet, and sort of market, Andy or market Taylor? How is the collaborative process usually functioning within a big series like this?
I think early on, we try to come up with ideas separately. We don't really want to talk about what we're both doing. We actually keep it pretty isolated. And then before we see the director and it gets to him, we come together and we kind of listen to the cues that we've written, and we decide which is crap and which is not, hopefully. And then from there, we sometimes he'll write something that inspires me, or I'll write maybe something that he likes, and we will expand on those ideas. And so I think once we have that, we don't really, if there's a piece, like a certain character that one of us is writing for, sometimes, we might take the piece because it's just easier because one of us is a little more familiar with it, but usually not. There's a lot of pieces that I've written that he would then write, or vice versa. It ends up being, by the end of it, you'll end up writing anything and everything, and it might be one of us or both of us who've written that cue. So I think it just depends on what episode and what scene you're talking about.
Yeah. So starting at the sort of beginning of the series, I remember some of the actors saying that they only had 5 scripts while they began shooting. So when you guys began sort of creating all of these concepts sonically and all the suites, did you guys only have 5 or 6 of the scripts, so you didn't know where the show would end up? And if so, while you guys were scoring, were you guys in some ways reacting to new stuff as it came in and sort of carrying the suspense that the audience carries throughout watching the series?
Yeah, we were trying to, I think by the time it got to us, I feel like we had a few more scripts. We didn't have all of them, but we had a few more. And I think at first we were just trying to sort of figure out, like, what do we want to latch onto here for themes, because you can't necessarily you could have a theme for every character or a sound, but we didn't want to. Mike usually doesn't want to inundate with like too much of one thing. He likes like the bigger picture to sort of translate. So we were Taylor and I were talking about like bigger picture of the show. Like, does the house have a theme? Does the family have a theme? Do bad things have a theme? And then we just tried to latch on to ideas that that may not be a final idea, but something we could start with. And I mean, like the percussion is a good example because Mike had mentioned that he liked the idea of percussion, but wasn't sure how it would play into the show. And I was reading, I forget which script I was reading, but one of the scripts talked about, there's the number 7 being an important number in the show, as you know, from having watched it. And so that was sort of the initial, like in the main title, like that was sort of the initial idea of like those 7 hits that happen, like towards the end of the theme, it goes dun, 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 dun. And that's like kind of a kindergarten approach to just like, well, the number 7's important. How can we incorporate it? And, but little things like that kind of informed, like, then it was like, okay, well now if we take these drum hits, what if we take them and just scatter them throughout the show? Starting with things like that was really helpful, because within the script, it was so deep and so unique. It was hard to tell, like, well, what will be scary or what will be dramatic and how will we work with that? So I know this isn't really an answer, but that's sort of how we felt when we started by reading the script.
Yeah.
Like, oh crap, like what should we just hit middle C and hope something good happens?
Yeah. So yeah, there you go. So a lot of composers talk about how important the visuals are in sort of creating a certain tone, and then the music sort of comes in and then sort of helps to accent the visuals. And in this specific show, the visuals are so distinct and so different, and the character design of certain entities that Mike creates are so fascinating. So how did the visual style and the cinematography and the sort of dark sets that they created, how did all of that influence your guys' musical approach?
Well, besides giving me nightmares,
there you go.
for me it was the kind of almost like texture of the show in the sense that it had a dark gothic, but it had a classic undertone. And so that really translated into, we can't play these super fancy, I love Ravel and Debussy. It's just so beautiful. But this, when you're doing a show, it's not about the music; it's about the show, and so you're trying to, uplift the show and make it as good as it can be. And in this case, what Mike had done was so beautiful. What the actors had done, they're pouring their hearts out. You don't want to get in the way of that. You want to support it, and there's a time and place to delicately, as Andy said early on, dance around that. So I think the Red Room and the performances and just the way that the actors kind of played off each other, I think it really, at least for me personally, it inspired a lot of scenes and music to play. A chord or a few notes go a long way when you have such amazing actors and amazing story. So it makes our job much easier. As fun it would be to be fancy. We did it for like maybe 8 bars, but it wasn't really. It was all very simple, and at end of the day, you want something that's that kind of communicates what the emotion of the characters, and it has to be simple, and it has to be hopefully memorable, and that's what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I think made it so great, is because it's so much easier to say, let's just, stack the whole thing with music, wall to wall. And it would have been very easy for Mike to say, just score the whole thing and it's going to be great. But he obviously had this vision of what he wanted it to be and what he wanted it to feel like. And I think that sometimes the areas where the music isn't there, impact the moments when the music actually appears. So I think it's just fantastically spotted in terms of where the music is. Yeah. So... Go ahead. Yeah.
Just to add to that real quick, it's interesting. Most TV shows will be done, and when they get to the dub stage, they just mix them. But in this case, Mike would say, in the spotting session, I don't know if I want music here. Let's score it. And if it is score, it'll be X, Y, and Z. So Taylor and I would score all the scenes for each show. And we'd get to the dub stage and we'd play through the episode, and Mike would say nope, yep, nope, yep, no, super specific, like very surgical, and it was so effective. He's so good with knowing exactly what he wants. Anyway, I just wanted to.
No, absolutely, yeah. Yeah. So I just have a couple questions from the GCN community, and one of them is from Leon, and he asked, first of all, great work. What was the general time frame you both had to complete the score for each episode, and was there temporary music used throughout the spotting sessions to signify where you would go? And we sort of answered that earlier a little bit with having your guys' music in there, but...
Yeah, the time frame, again, it always behooves you to have thematic material early on. If you're writing thematic material while the show's going, whoa, boy, that's enough about. You're kind of working in some ways, against the flow. You want to know what the themes are so you can hint at them or play them here or play them there. So for us, having that kind of worked out made a lot of the scenes really easy, because we were in some way or another touching or repeating or evolving those themes. But to answer its question, when we were actually scoring it, it went from about a week to a couple episodes being 2 days. One episode was 2 days, sometimes 3 days. It was really tight towards the end.
And so Petri asks, what efforts did you guys make to try to make your score for Haunting of Hill House different from other scores in the same genre, being horror shows?
We tried to actually, when possible, to not play the drama and to kind of not play the horror too, like not to sort of broadcast what is coming or how anyone should feel, which I think other shows have maybe done that, but I think that, again, Mike, not to keep talking about Mike, but Mike really was very deliberate in, there were times when we'd think we're not broadcasting a scare here, but let's do this. And Mike would say, no, let's not. And that's a gutsy move to make, and also very effective when you lean into it like the way he did. So to that degree, I think also keep the simplicity was something we really tried to use as, a differentiating factor. I mean, piano is such a classic instrument. It's timeless, really. So it's hard to, there weren't ways to really, we didn't try to produce or do any like reverse delays on the piano. It was like real simple reverbs, a simple piano. And then, there's a lot of chaos and noise that we love to nerd out with. So there's always that.
Yeah.
I think too, I mean, which is common in horror scores is that a lot of times they lack melody. I mean, they do, especially contemporary horror scores. They just, they may be cool sounding, but there's no melody. And we've been in situations where, they don't want melody. I mean, they will deliberately say, I do not want any melody here. I just want noise. So, for us, we're lucky that Mike, he likes melody, and so we can kind of play against the grain a little bit. Where something is scary and dark, we don't have to tell everybody, hey, this is super scary, this is super dark. We can say, hey, this person is emotionally cut off from the world and super selfish, and we can play the emotion of this like character where people feel wrecked when they're watching it. So it's a different kind of torture.
Yeah. So the next one is, how did you approach the non-linear timeline of the show, and how did that sort of affect your musical approach?
We talked about that a lot as we were going on. Taylor and I talked, before we even presented ideas, we talked about having like, a sound for the kids and a sound for the them as adults. I think though in the end what we found was there was a lot of jumping back and forth in the story, so there was no need for us to sort of add to that, and it was more kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier about just kind of, I mean, there were things that we tried to do to sort of give an older feel. We tried to incorporate like a solo clarinet in places just to give like a different texture and sound. A lot of the clarinet got killed, but it is in there, and that was sort of something we had tried early on, as sort of an older sound to give the house a bit of a sound. But we ended up not really drifting. Am I wrong, Taylor? But I don't think we really, I know we talked about it a ton, about lasering out stuff for the kids, but I don't think we ever really did it.
No, I think we used, woodwinds was mainly I would say, if there was something, you would probably hear more woodwinds in the flashback sequences than you would hear in the present. And just because it gave it a little bit more of an older sound. The problem is I think, people start to fall in love with certain textures and sounds as you're writing. And what happens is, even if you're intending for the kids and all the flashback, I'm going to use this woodwind section. And then when in actuality comes, people are like, oh my God, I love whatever that is. Let's use it here. And it's in a contemporary section, today. You can't say, well, hang on a second, you're wrong, I'm right, because it's not, it's not about you, it's about the show. So I think those lines kind of blurred as the show progressed.
Yeah. So my last question for you guys is, if you guys both had one piece of advice for somebody trying to pursue media composition as a career, what would that piece of advice be in terms of navigating the industry, steps to take, and what you guys have learned from collaborating with directors and all that type of stuff?
I would probably say go out and start scoring everything you can. There's so much media out there right now. I know that when I first got started, I would drive to, I live in Los Angeles, and at the time I would drive to USC and to LMU, two colleges here that have film programs, and I would post on the board because the internet wasn't really that hip back then. So I would just post notices on the board like, we'll score your film. And I probably rifled through 20 to 30 films, like little student films, and I still have some of those relationships. But I think that you don't have to do that. And another approach you could do is to get an apprenticeship with a composer. But I would say just just, I mean, not to sound like a Nike commercial, but just do it. You know, pull up Pro Tools or Logic or Digital Performer and like find a friend who has some video footage that needs some music, and just, you know, go for it. And, you know, if they don't have any money, make them buy you dinner, you know, at first. Or, you know, I think that's a good way. What about you, Taylor? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, you know, you should just, in the beginning, you should be willing to learn as much as you can and work with anyone who will allow you to work, you know, work on something that they're making. Just because in the beginning, you know, experience is priceless. And I think you need to just get as much as you can. And being very strategic about it, if it were me, I would suggest working for someone who is successful and incredibly busy. Because if you do that, just, you know, it's always about what's in reach, because you have to understand that regardless of talent and skill, which is obviously a time and place to have, and that will set you apart from hopefully other people, convenience to certain composers when they're overwhelmed is an incredible advantage, because, you know, there's lots of things we've all heard where like everyone's like, oh, you know, I could do that, or that, you know, you could do that, and so, you know, there you go. If you're in convenience of getting grabbed for that, well, then that, you know, elevates your chances.
Those are two amazing answers. Andy and Taylor, thank you guys so much for taking the time today. And I have to say again, hats off from the whole composition community for your guys' great achievement with Haunting of Hill House. It really is great. And it is our dreams that possibly this could be coming back. I know you guys can't say anything, but if it ever does, we will be waiting here excited. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Ashton. Appreciate it, man.